welcome to the Writer Center, such as it is in this virtual space. If you don't know the Writer Center, we're a literary arts nonprofit headquartered in the Washington, D.C. area. We support writers and everyone who wants to write. That includes putting on 300 writing workshops a year in all genres and for all experience levels. And right now, through the end of 2020, at least through the end of 2020, those will be online virtual workshops, either run through Zoom, or we have some asynchronous workshops that are based on discussion boards and virtual forums where you don't have to log in at a set time if you don't want to use the video thing. We also, though, do tons of free events. That's the nonprofit side of our mission. So events like this, but we're also doing just about every week a craft happy hour where one of our staff members or one of the part of the Writer Center family will do a chat with a writer who's recently published a book. Again, we have poets, we have essayists, we have nonfiction people, and we have novelists. So we've really covered the whole range of those, and we are booked with those all the way through September now and starting to book October. So a whole lineup. Just go to writer.org is our website to see everything that we have going on. That's all I want to say. I believe, Nancy, are you, I don't have the lineup in front of me, which I should have printed, but Nancy, I believe I'm handing off to you now. So Nancy M. So I'll hand off to you now. Please unmute yourself and let's get the show started. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nancy Mitchell, Associate Editor of Special Features for Plume. Thanks so much for tuning in to help us celebrate the launch of Plume Anthology 8. It's filled with over 100 poems from established and emerging poets, and it is a wonder. We're going to each read one from the anthology and then two of our own. And thanks so much to Zach. It was wonderful to meet you and to host us here. And thanks so much to Leeya and Stuart for organizing this reading. And of course, thanks to the creator and editor-in-chief, Daniel Lawless, without whom none of us would be here. So yay, Danny, it's so great. Plume's first issue launched in 2011 with 12 poems and a staff of 2, and has grown to a staff of 12 and includes video interviews, reviews, and lots of other wonderful features. So cheers to all tonight, and cheers especially to this. This is really a special, special anthology. And if you want to order it, you can go to Plume's website, or we might have the link here for you to order it. But honestly, I think every year I say this, that this is the best, but I think it's just amazing. So without further ado, I'm going to give you Nancy Naomi Carlson. She's the author of 10 titles, 6 of which are translated. An Infusion of Violets, Seagull Books, 2019, and was named New and Noteworthy by the New York Times. A recipient of 2 NEA grants, and she was a finalist for the Best Translation Book Award and the CLMP Firecracker Poetry Award. An associate editor for Tupelo Press, her work has appeared in such journals as APR, the Georgia Review, the Paris Review, and Poetry. Her website is www.nancynaomicarlson.com. Nancy?
All right, now I'm unmuted. Thank you, Nancy, the other Nancy, or I'm the other Nancy. And thank you, audience, for being here. And thank you, Plume and Plume staff, whom I'm meeting for the first time, and the Writers Center, and Zach for bringing me here. And I'm technically not in Plume 8, but I was in Plume February 2020. So I had some translations there, a feature of several of Karl Torabuli from Mauritius, who writes about the coolies who came from India and China and then stopped at the island of Mauritius, where some stayed to work the sugarcane fields at the turn of the century, and others were shipped out to the colonies. And he gives a voice to their horrible suffering that they went through as indentured workers. And he coined the term coolitude, which is like Aimé Césaire coining the term negritude, imbuing it with power and dignity and a sense of honor. And the book Cargo Hold of Stars is my translation of Karl Topabuli, and it is coming out from Seagull Books. I wore my necklace from India when I was a guest lecturer at the Seagull Publishing School in Calcutta, where he's located. He's distributed by the University of Chicago Press, but he has this beautiful office right in the middle of Calcutta, and all the differences of colors and poverty and richness of literature. So what I plan to do is read 2 translations and then one of my poems. You guys are reading 1 out of the Plume and 2 of your poems. So because I love translation and I live for translation, though I live for my own poetry too, I guess, I do a sound mapping of the original. So this was the sound map of a very simplistic one of the French that I'm going to read. And what I noticed was that Topabuli uses alliteration. So he has ventre, vent, vigile, voleur, close to each other. And he also has the P's of petite porte. And he has the A sound. And that last line, grave ces phrases au grand large, you can hear that music, can't you? You can almost feel it. And so then what I do in my translation is I sit there and try to come up with my own kind of sound pattern, which I guess you can't really see here very well, where I have rigging repeats, brave the belly, blending of bloods. But in that last line, that tough one of grave ces phrases au grand large, I have engraved these phrases on open seas, engrave these phrases on open seas with the little kicker alliteration of the z, engrave these phrases on open seas. So that's a quick summary of how I do it. Here's a little French, if you'll bear with me with some French. Le gréement répète son geste coupant à la cuisse de l'océan. Quel téméraire équipage du vent. D'astres et tout vigile et voleur de paysages. Aux petites portes des continents, pour seul poids d'errance, notre mélange de sang additionne nos purs exils aux absents. Cale d'étoiles difficilement cicatrices, bouche incendiaire, pour pénitence, nos lèvres ouvertes, gravent ces phrases au grand large. He doesn't use titles. The rigging repeats its slicing motion through the ocean sky. What audacious crew braved the belly of the wind crossways through the storm? Commotion of eyes, sole complaint of the stars, and every lookout is a landscape thief. At the tiny gateways to mainlands, with our wanderings for only wait, our blending of bloods adds our pure exiles to the absent ones. Cargo hold of stars, contrived scar, mouth of embers, as penance, our parted lips engrave these phrases on open seas. And that Cale d'étoiles, Carl's name is pronounced the same way, Cale, K-H-A-L, as Cale, C-A-L-E, meaning cargo hold. And he's bringing the image of the coolies who were under in the cargo hold, but they could see the stars above from the ships that were transporting them across the oceans. This one is from a woman's point of view, and you have to, I guess it's good to know, qui faire is Mauritian Creole for why. Qui faire, and it's like que faire, which is French for what to do. I'll smash all the astrolabes made of gold, so children can be born far from chains of lead. My plum flesh hooks exile. My banished blood won't allow me to ease my fables. Qui faire? Qui faire? Lost without sun, my 3 eyes shut. I speak without grief of my water wound. So many days go by and I'm dying of fright. Deciphering love helps pass the time. Qui faire, qui faire. Ah, if I could escape from your hands to deny Columbus my ovaries, yes, escape from your loins to deny Nelson my lower back. Set me free from my only backboned mast. Que faire? What to do? Toss myself overboard? True to the exile I choose. And a COVID-inspired villanelle of mine. I've never read this to an audience before. Been writing these furiously. And it's called Obad Day 50. Another quarantine morning hovers over your bed to overtake the dark. There must be 50 ways to leave these covers. Sweep back the blackout curtains that shutter your eyes. Take a swipe at your alarm. Another quarantine morning hovers, spreads like birdsong the clean scent of clover. Nothing can stop the sun's diurnal arc, not even the 50 ways to leave these covers. Your legs feel like peanut butter. You can't gather strength in your arms. Another quarantine morning hovers. No need to dress, don't stress or overthink, and devote the day to your art. There must be 50 ways. To leave these covers, stop thinking of bodies that won't be recovered. Make a wish on the morning star. Another quarantine morning hovers. There must be a way to leave these covers. So now on to, thank you, on to Danny Lawless. And this is my first time meeting Danny, meeting him in quotes, which is great. I met Danny many years ago, several years ago, through Alex Scuttle, the Russian translator. And Daniel Lawless's book, The Gun My Sister Killed Herself With, was published by Salmon Poetry in 2018 and reviewed in Harvard Review, the Asheville Review, and elsewhere. Recent poems appear in The Common, Field, Plowshares, Prairie Schooner, and other journals. Poems are forthcoming in Upstreet, the American Journal of Poetry, to Horatio. He's a 2018-2019 recipient of a Shifting Foundation grant and the founder and editor of Our Plume, a journal of contemporary poetry, Plume Editions, and the annual Plume Poetry anthologies. Danny.
Can you hear me? Everyone? Okay. First of all, thank you all for coming. This is really wonderful. And Zach and Leeya, and the Writer Center, Stuart, thank you for setting this up. It's been really great. And I hope we get to do more of them. I'm going to read a poem, not from the anthology, but one I like a lot. And we used to publish her more frequently, but I think suddenly she sort of got really famous and got busy. It's a poem from Jia Yu, and translated by Stephen Bradbury, who also worked with us fairly often. So this one's called The Plumber Is Here. The plumber is here. Having mentioned the relationship of poetry and reality, what could be more fitting than the plumber is here? For when a plumber appears before you, behind him lies a vast body of analysis, which on the whole is unintelligible to him. You can call him and he comes, isn't that how it goes? But on the whole is all too intelligible to you, and isn't that why you called him? From time to time, an experienced plumber will come with his apprentice, the kind whose knowledge of the craft is well nigh zero. The zero the Indians invented, which left the Greeks at sea in which the Arab traders brought to China via the Silk Road, together with spices and ivory. That's something from nothing, full of holes. In any case, you have a leak requiring immediate attention. And so the plumber is here with his something from nothing apprentice. I love that poem, very nice. You. And I will be brief. I'll read, like most of you, I imagine, you've had a lot of time to write in these days. I'm retired, so I have a lot of time. And I've been working on a series of poems called, under the subheading Definitions. So I'll take a word and kind of run around with it from there. So I will read, I guess the first one will be Freudenschreck. Not a French word, Freudenschreck. And it's from Definitions. Freudenschreck, or intense pleasure fright. Leave it to the Germans to coin a word for the fleeting sense of being seized by such an inexplicable joy it verges on terror. Or maybe it's inexplicable terror pretending to be joy. Also, a physical phenomenon. Neurologists say the englada glows red as a jackball, whether subject gaze at plantacepials or gallows. Picture a joyride, the Appalachian pin brides of Eugene Meatyard. Put yourself in the shoes of Ayanna Clemens, 44, of Peru, Indiana, a longtime congregant of the Last Days Christian Church, according to the Gazette, who may have had a seizure that caused her to shiver all over, although another passerby reported hearing her shout, "Praise him," or "Praise God," before she sort of rocked him, before she cast that beautiful child into that cold river. And the second one is maybe not a definition one. I'll read a poem from my Irish heritage. And it's one of those sing-songy poems, you know, you get started a couple lines and you just can't give it up. It's just, you kind of wish you could, but you can't. So this is one of those sing-songy poems. It's called Milady. And it's a word my mom used to say when we were kids all the time, and not always in a good way. This is called Milady. So Milady, she'd say, Ma's liquored up catch-all address to her every imagined American better. One day a stashed sherry la-ti-da mocking feck and gale storm on decollage on Dinah Shore. Another a poisoned dart aimed at her big shot employer, Mr. Phillips' new Texas bride B. Yee-hawing a jelly glass gin, pretend martini, and lumbering the cha-cha as she boiled the green out of Thursday cabbage. Mostly I just stare. And then she'd sort of cry and distant, "Sweetie," and you get the picture. This was in the late 50s, when recent Irish immigrant domestics like her must have already been tangled up in their lives, their haplessness and fearsome Catholic shame. Ma's wasn't the only one either. Sometimes in daydreams, I can hear them. Milady from Huge Delia bellowed at a blonde majorette. Milady from Addled Maggie spat at a cock-capped whack as all the downtown maid traipsed along a VE Day parade through Louisville Central Park, pissed on pursed bottles of cheap classic club. Call it jealousy or a class thing if you want, but that night, Ma said she hadn't slept better in years. Breakfast late, Lucky's and tea, dodged the pins, Milady later still, as I passed by the parlor, snarled once to the dust-specked mirror before she sort of curtsied, before I just stared at her packing up, before she left us for good for Galway by nightfall. There you go, 2 poems. And now it is my great pleasure to reintroduce Nancy Mitchell, who was, I hesitate to use the word hire because there wasn't, as you all well know, any money involved. This wasn't a monetary transaction, but she was the first one after Jason Cook and I began this. Jason was a former student of mine, and the origin story briefly of Plume is I was teaching creative writing and I saw him not paying attention to me and staring at his computer, and I kind of moseyed back there assuming he was looking at something pornographic or otherwise, not otherwise class related, but it turned out he was working on his own literary magazine. And I thought, damn, that's pretty, I might be able to do that. So I got him back to my office and we talked and became friends. And he did the first website design, and he helped me with the layout for a while. And then I went on it, did my own, and then my wife Donna helped. And now we have the wonderful Christina Mullen doing all of that work. So it's odd, as you say, Nancy, how we started out as nothing, a whim. I hope to get out 1 issue and declare victory and mosey off, and it became this 9 years later. So, but Nancy Mitchell, the first one to come aboard Plume after that. She is a 2012 Pushcart Prize recipient, the author of 2 volumes of poetry, The Near Surround and Grief Hut. Her poems have appeared in Agni, Poetry Daily, Salt Hill Journal, and Green Mountains Review. She is taught in the English and Environmental Studies departments at Salisbury University, Maryland, and is an associate editor for Plume Poetry Journal. She serves as the Poet Laureate of the city of Salisbury, Maryland. And you are in for such a treat. Thank you, Nancy, for everything. And I'll leave you to your own devices now. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. That was lovely. Thank you so much. You know, I have loved every minute of doing special features with Plume. In fact, early on, when I was really probably not even a teenager, I was reading the Paris Review. My parents read Cheever, Updike, blah, blah, blah. And they, for some reason, I guess I got a Paris Review or something. So I had deep fantasies of being an interview for the Paris Review. And actually, Danny and I co-authored this Plume Interviews, and I think it's pretty darn good. That was the thing that, you know, that was sort of the model, the Paris Reviews. I love the way they meandered and they kind of let things organically unfold. So that said, I'm going to read a poem that's in this anthology, which is so terrific. It's by, I did an interview with Kevin Proofer, and this is one of the poems. You all know who Kevin Proofer is. He's amazing, he's stunning, he just blows me completely away. And I spent a lot of time with these poems, so I thought, this is the one that I'll do. Then I'll just do 2 little small ones of my own. But this is so appropriate for now. And as I mentioned before, he wrote it on election night when the disaster commenced. So, election night. When the deified Nero ordered Seneca to open his veins, the playwright complied. Though he was by then sick and infirm, and his blood wouldn't flow quickly enough from the wounds. So his friends gave him poison to speed his demise. Though this too failed, and seeing no other option, they ran a bath for the groaning old man, and finally, successfully drowned him in it. And that is the end of Seneca, who, until then, astonished the world. I was awakened late that election night by raccoons. They were plundering the garbage again, their claws scraping inside the bins the noise of ripping plastic bags. A bottle rolled down the driveway into the grass, and while I lay in bed, my book where I'd left it under the lamp. Then a sudden, frantic shuffling as they fought over what? A piece of old bread, an apple sweet with rot. Beside me, my wife never woke, even when I went to the window, moving the curtains aside, squinting into the dark yard where there were so many raccoons climbing among the garbage bins that I couldn't count them. Whether Seneca had conspired against Nero remains an open question, but his friends had more immediate concerns. The emperor had said the old man must die, and helping him on his way was the proper thing to do. No matter that the empire itself was thick with rot, no matter that Nero was lavish and plundering, homicidal, that he'd lost all sense of right and wrong, listening only to flattery, as the historian I'd been reading that election night told it. Opening his vein, she wrote, was simply the best way to accomplish a patriotic exit. The only pity was it didn't work out exactly as Seneca had planned. And what of the citizens who took years to tire of Nero? He had, after all, to execute his own mother before they turned against him. While the raccoons scrambled in the trash, and darling, I said, but my wife didn't stir, turned to face the flashlight I aimed at them from the porch steps, their eyes reflecting the glare greenly. They froze that way, cold air swirling, a night breeze high in the trees, a car passing somewhere. The darkness for a moment, quiet as history. Their glowing eyes, before they returned to their work, as the next morning I returned to mine, picking cold, wet trash from the lawn, filling fresh black bags with it, hosing down the driveway, while my wife slept in and the raccoons, fat and satisfied, dozed in a black drain somewhere. And Seneca stayed dead in the book on the table by the bed, having shown his friends a correct awareness for the power of truth and the rightness of the state. I tell you, that makes me feel so good to read that damn poem. I don't know why, but I know we should be posting Pretty Little Puppies right now, but so just a few really little ones of mine. I think this during, this incredible kind of constellation of, I can't even begin to describe what we're in right now, but it certainly is like no other time. I don't think. There must be times like it, but there's a reckoning. And I think the reckoning has to do with our facing a lot of things and coming to grips and standing back and being quiet allies. So, the past. If we have to bring it up, we'll need gloves, latex, pulled elbow high, safety glasses, and yes, masks. We'll spread it all out in the sun. We'll burn the mold off and the stink. Truce. No guns, but no breeze. No fists and bricks, but no birds. It's going to be dark. It's going to be black and white. So it gives me really great pleasure to introduce this next reader. He is a friend of mine, and he is a neighbor of mine, and I just am so sorry that we don't have more time to spend together. He is a marvelous poet. He's an incredible teacher. He inspires people in ways that I've said over and over again, if I could have had a teacher in my young life as a writer, it would be John Nieves. He has poems forthcoming or recently published in journals such as North American Review, Crazy Horse, Southern Review, Colorado Review, and Massachusetts Review. He won the Indiana Review Poetry Contest, and his first book, Curio, won the Elixir Press Annual Poetry Award, Judges Prize. He is Associate Professor of English at Salisbury University and editor of this incredible magazine, The Shore. You'll have to check it out and submit to it. It's wonderful. The Shore Poetry. He received his MA from University of South Florida and his PhD from the University of Missouri. So you're in for a big treat with this guy, John.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and thank you very much to Zach and Danny as well, and Leeya and everyone for helping put this together. I really appreciate all of you so very much. It's an honor to read with so many incredible poets, and boy, did I need this. I'm going to do this a little backwards. I'm going to read my poem from Plume 8 and another one of my poems. Then I'm going to read a poem from the Plume website because I know better than to try to follow that poem. So that's how it's going to go. So this is from the amazing anthology Plume 8. I think we all need a little bit of orange right now, so that isn't related to other orange things. So I was really happy to see that cover. Okay, so let's see here. This is called Zinc. The earth is hungry. It is good to remember this, even as our bodies tingle off to sleep on cool sheets, soft mattresses. The alarm may or may not be set, the blinds pulled closed to keep out the street light, or locked open to let in the sun. The machinery of our lives whirs seamlessly. Bills are sent, the air comes on, the cat licks from its bowl. The components of breakfast wait to find their combined purpose. But now we know. Now, all of this is shaded a little by a man being swallowed in his sleep, bed and all. Morning's has grown darker by his call to his brother and the sounds of the shovel in the hole until even family had to be pulled away. The earth stays hungry and never gave him back, but opened its mouth again. In the field his home used to fill. It ate daylight and rain, and the people of the town hurried to close it again. And every night now, when the lights go out and we sense a little rumbling, it is good to remember our position, good to remember the ways in and out while we can travel them with a simple roll to one side or the other. This is a little Eastern Shore poem called Scuttle. Don't drink the gnat. It plants itself in your water glass like celery seed gone sweaty in the wet earth. Don't leave the porch light open. It will call in all the things that want to eat what you eat, that want to taste even you here in this wishful darkness. Look, the hedge ends just outside our view to the southeast, much like the mountains, much like youth all crumbled up in shadow and shifting. Don't sing to it. Save your whistle for the hard nail, for the cider fast poured into the whiskey, ice clinking in the old fashioned. Remember when blood was what we called everything close by. Remember how everything close by fit in the balsam breathe. Say something, please. From the swing we used to creak in when the night owls had their way with our sleep. Say something throaty, something rhythmic that refuses to rhyme. Don't promise the skyline. Don't promise the headlights winding down the drive. There will never be a seat left for either of us. We didn't carve ourselves. All right, and so the author of this poem, I wanted to say I was very, very fortunate to be asked by Danny and Nancy to put together a couple 5 under 35 features for Plume that I thoroughly enjoyed doing. And this is from one of those. And the author is in the audience tonight, Emma DePenice, who is an amazing, amazing poet. Check out her work and her website. This is Marlborough Street meets mineralization after Stanley Foreman's fire escape collapse. A stone tree finds itself hard to forget. Under rock and ash, rings and bark remain, their life replaced by copper, cobalt, crystal. This is not that tree, but its artifact. This wood won't decay. This grainy print will never hit the ground. Tree and stone suspended and released. Is this gravity or levitation? Their young bodies, falling leaves floating. The pot will never break. The soil never separate. The plant never feel a new breeze. Could someone still grab her outstretched arms? Her hands ask with question marks. She could be snow angeling the glass. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce the amazing Amanda Newell. Her poems have appeared or will be forthcoming in publications such as Cimarron Review, Gargoyle, Rattle, Rhino Poetry, Scoundrel Time, and War Literature in the Arts. She's the recipient of scholarships or fellowships from Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Frost Place, and the Virginia Center for Creative Arts. She is the litigation director for Washington, D.C.-based law firm and teaches part-time at Frostburg State University. She also holds an MFA in poetry from Warren Wilson's Program for Writers. Man, they put out badass writers, just saying. Okay, so here comes Amanda.
Thank you so much, John. You all can hear me, right? I've unmuted successfully. Okay, so I thought the poem that I chose to read this evening from the Plume anthology is a poem by Alberto Rios, who was my very first workshop instructor ever and was such a generous, kind, and inspiring teacher that I wanted to read it just in honor of him this evening. And it's called How the Sky is Made. We have camped out, eaten, filled ourselves, told the best stories we know, and gotten tired. All of us sleepy, we douse the fire and watch as so much of it goes up. Those sparks and bits and shifts of smoke, they suddenly make the sky. They suddenly go to their second jobs as stars in the night and working as clouds in the horizon of the next day. Fire, that ingredient for making the sky, we have forgotten. Read two really brief ones. Post-mortem say, could say crimsoned limbs and blood moon glass shatter. Say he was chrome smoke. Say the night diamond flecked. Say the cause was exsanguination due to blunt force trauma from a wreck. Say too many contributing factors to list. Or say the truth, which is to say, it was dark, we never saw each other. Say by the time we did, it was already too late. Say the loss total. And this next one is brief, and I'm actually reading it as a kind of segue to my introduction to Stuart Moss. So it's called Stoic, and it's about a former student of mine who was nearly killed in Afghanistan. Stoic. When I see how swollen and purple it is, how the skin, like a film of dried glue, stretches over the bones of his foot, so clearly now not a foot, more like the burnt end of a candle's wick or rain-soaked rotten wood, which, if I pursed my lips and blew softly, would crumble onto his white sheets. I think this would be less painful, one small grace which surely he deserves. And when he says it's no longer a foot to him anyway, that it's only one limb, a paper cut, I imagine his foot as punctuation mark, curled as it is like a right parenthesis, already half afterthought. Okay, and so because I know that Stuart Moss, former executive director of the Writers Center, I know that veterans causes and are close to his heart as they are to mine. So I decided that I wanted to read that little poem to segue. So as I said, Stuart Moss is a former executive director of the Writers Center and he's helped establish creative writing programs for adult immigrants and members of the military being treated for neurological and psychological trauma. Prior to that, he worked as an educator and fundraiser in educational institutions around the country, and he's taught literature and creative writing in both the USA and abroad. Scotland, Greece, Zimbabwe, Afghanistan, and Nepal are among the countries in which he's lived and worked. His essays have been included Retire the Colors, Veterans and Civilians on Iraq and Afghanistan, edited by Dario Di Battista, and Plume Literary Journal, Poetry in Plume, Goss 183, and Origins Literary Review. He's also been featured in the Poet and the Poem podcast at the Library of Congress, which is a great series. And he was educated at Union College in New York and Harvard, and he's a native of Boston, Massachusetts, but resides now in Annapolis, Maryland. So it's my pleasure to welcome Stuart Moss.
Can you hear me now? Good. Amanda, what a wonderful transition that was. Thank you so much. Very beautiful, and beautiful poems as well that you read. I can't tell you what an astonishing privilege this is to be part of this reading. Back during the years when I was at the Writers Center as the executive director, of course, we never imagined that this time would come when so much of our work would be on virtual. And I just want to applaud Zach Powers for the work that he has done and the staff that he has there to help him. So thank you so much to all of you. I'm going to start my reading with a poem that I wrote, probably 2016 or 2017, that was in response to a terrible tragedy that took place in Istanbul, a city that I knew pretty well from my travels there during my many years of wandering and traveling back in the 1970s. And you may remember that there was a nightclub called the Club Reina in Istanbul, where there was a terrible slaughter of participants that took place on New Year's Eve in 2016. And so I was very moved by that, having known the city and having spent time in that beautiful and complex city. And I was very moved by a quotation from an interview that was done by one of the survivors of that incident, Sezen Arseven, whose fiance tragically was killed. And when she was interviewed by a reporter after that event, she said, "I am returning without you from the place we went together." So this poem, which is called "For Those Whose Lives Have Seen Themselves," is in response to that event. Welcome, all who have traveled the long road from where your deepest dreams began, in the wild ferment of sleep. And when profoundly drunk or stoned, and walked out with whatever heavy burdens you carried, your thumb outstretched and maybe your other hand taunting death with a sign saying Beirut or Aleppo or Istanbul. Looked at the reflection of yourself in your lover's Ray-Bans and asked what it meant to see the world and break the bonds that held you to a former life. If only you could name the thick liquid in which you'd floated, assured by the certainty of the next day and all the days to come. I remember in a cheap hotel in Amsterdam, where the pipes entered and returned through wide, rough holes in the sheetrock, watching a couple make love in the next room, ashamed that I denied them their privacy, their fumbling intimacy. Perhaps they washed us too, as we abandoned ourselves for a few moments above the bustling canals and in the cracked mirror bolted to the wall opposite our bed. Who knows what became of them, or any of us who are left in crummy hotel rooms by those we desire, or because of bullets shattering raucous dancers in a nightclub. Sometimes clarity only comes with loss, for it tightens the skin that binds us to our own silhouettes and makes our shadows sharper, more distinct in the sun, or disappear forever in the darkening, unholy cities. And I'll follow that with the poem from another poet in Plume by a Turkish poet, because I thought that was appropriate since the poem was inspired, if you want to call it that, by an event that happened in Turkey. And this is by a poet named, terrible at pronouncing very difficult Turkish names, Uksanchur C, called Ghazal. It's a ghazal with bread. How many summers apart from you in search of bread home, bread school, bread wine, bread I labored under the hot sun, not as July as much as you, as much as bread I was young. Though it wouldn't pass, it passed as though time, as though we've eaten, as though bread, we sopped our pain in each other's sauce, but pain was like stone, is like bread. School is over, the house is over, hush now, love is over, now life, now stale like bread. And then let me finish by reading a poem that I think Danny is publishing in September, called The Book of Forgotten Geniuses. And this poem was inspired during the pandemic by a little Post-it note that I found in a novel that I had purchased secondhand online, that had on it 3 kind of enigmatic and totally unrelated words and phrases written on it. And I decided I would try to make a poem of what I read. And those were Einstein, number 1. Number 2 was $3. And number 3 was famous failures, which I changed to Forgotten Geniuses. So this is called The Book of Forgotten Geniuses. I can understand why the Egyptians wanted to be entombed among the artifacts of their lived lives. Papyrus etched with a procession of signs that would never stop intoning in the silence. A carved granite ball ready to be hurled at enemies in the next world. And mummified cats hushed of all but the memories of their soft murmuring. But not all were rich, nor am I, and desire only to be buried with the $3 I got for shoveling snow when I was 10, thus initiating me into the ancient procession of capitalists. The obscure poems I compose with the youthful ferocity of Mozart, a few amulets of grace I carried back from the deserts, and my favorite tome, The Book of Forgotten Geniuses, which, like the Chronicles, traces our journey from birth to the exile from which we've never really escaped. And I shall gift it to Einstein, who has rested all these years among his own relics. The frayed bow of the violin he played to scratch out the music of his longings, and the deflated tire of the bicycle he pedaled from the beginning to the end, then back again. And with his thumbs still dusty from the chalk he used to sketch his hieroglyphs about time onto boards as black as the endlessness of space, he will turn the tattered pages, slap his forehead in disbelief and mutter, "How come I never thought of that myself?" Now it's my great pleasure to introduce, I think, our final reading. My wonderful and beautiful friend, Leeya Mehta, who actually got me involved in Plume to begin with. Leeya is a prize-winning poet and fiction writer. Her column, The Company We Know, The Company We Keep, runs in the Washington Independent Review of Books. Leeya grew up in Bombay and was a Radhakrishnan scholar at Oxford. After travels in the Arctic and a fellowship in Japan, she lives in Washington with her 2 beautiful daughters and husband, who are wonderful friends of ours, where she works in international development at the World Bank. Her new collection of poems, A Story of the World Before the Fence, is available for pre-order. And you can find her latest work at leeyamehta.com. My great pleasure is to introduce my wonderful friend, Leeya.
Thank you, Stuart. Those poems were amazing. I met Stuart at the Writers' Center in 2013 after the inaugural poet, Richard Blanco, had read his incredible poem on the lawns of the Capitol. And Stuart and Barbara and I have been friends since, and I miss my trips up to the Writers' Center. We used to go get coffee and sometimes we go get dinner, and it was just, I hope those times return. Thank you to Danny and to Nancy and Amanda and Nancy Naomi Carlson and John Nieves. Thank you for your poems that have come before, and thank you for a wonderful evening. Thanks, Zach. I attended a reading online by Split This Rock recently, and I just love the way the executive director of Split This Rock, Rasha Abdul Hadi, introduces the space. And I was fortunate enough to receive a few poems from her that were published in Plume. She is quite an incredible woman. I'll read a couple of lines from her bio. She's queer Palestinian Southerner who grew up between Damascus, Syria and rural Georgia. And you know, is a remarkable poet whose work I just shared with you on the chat, is available on Plume, where she reads her own poems. And I should say they, I correct myself. So Rasha's poem, Origin Story, is the first poem I'm going to read, and it appears in Plume. I found this poem just had the most remarkable first line, and that's why I chose it, and it's quite short. And I also found that it conveyed something about the sense of inner turmoil and trouble that we're going through currently in this particular time that we find ourselves. Origin Story, Rasha Abdul Hadi. There is always agency in it. We got in the car, didn't we? Down to the one, though we cried ourselves scared the whole ride home because he had to prove he was in control with his friend, formerly exiled, sitting beside him. And you just as drunk and arguing, and the baby wailing next to you, as I, 12, willed us unharmed down a long road with my hands on the handle and against the window, as if to calm a startled animal. Now I'm going to read one poem of mine. It's a little long. I like the narrative style. And it's the 1st of August, and on the 6th of August, 1945, America dropped the atom bomb on 1944. Did I misspeak? 1944. 5, yeah. 1945, I didn't misspeak. 1945, America dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. I visited Hiroshima, and I'm often struck by how nature is able to recuperate after what seems like the most terrible obliteration, burning. They found this even in Chernobyl, where a lot of the nature comes back after years of exposure to radiation and the burning, because the heat is very high when you have a nuclear explosion. And so this poem came out of that visit to Hiroshima, and it took me many years to write it. And I was struck by how, when I was talking to some people recently, they were saying that in Japan, a lot of people are still finding the words to speak about what happened, and they have only recently, after many decades, begun to speak. And there's a sense that speaking takes sometimes 50 years after a trauma. But my experience when I was in Japan was not quite that. I found that everyone was extremely interested in speaking and talking in Hiroshima, because they wanted to give the world this lesson that we had to take away with us, that we should never do this again. So I will begin. Decorum was published in Plume under a different title. Decorum, Women at the Peace Memorial, Hiroshima. This was not about you. This was not about me. We were the picture book couple only to them. White men had dropped bombs on their faces, yet they wanted to embrace us, bless us, make sure they would be the last ones to need a vocabulary for extermination. Pika dawn, Pika, the atomic bomb light, dawn, the sound of the bomb. The first woman saw you, so handsome with your long blonde hair, hiding your irreverent blue eyes. She asked if you were American, and you said no, English, which eased the tension just a little bit. She saw me in love with you and assumed we could all abandon our restraint and hold hands together and pray for peace. So you and I stood in a manicured park under phoenix trees and held hands for the first time. I have a confession to make. I have never been taught how to pray, especially in public. It frightened me to touch this strange woman, her long face reorganized by burns carried for half a century, her forehead where her eyes should be. Suppose she could enter my mind, leaving shards of memories that would cut me. But you squeezed my hand tight, even after we had moved away, and whispered to me that my mind had the power to keep itself safe from wandering spirits. You had walked the Camino de Santiago, so you knew it was all up to me. You were a pilgrim, always in search of God. They could leave you out in a desert without your shoes, and you would labor 100 days if you had a church at the end of the road. I had walked with you for hours through floors of death, but after this peace museum, I knew I had never been tested. I do not know what I would do in a desert. You cannot assume anything of yourself unless you have experienced fire. This woman, Setsuko, was 6 years old in 1945. She was on her way to school, balancing on the back of a silver bicycle with a red bell that her mother was riding when the Enola Gray flew over Mount Hiji. Hours later, on our way to dinner, the other woman stopped us unexpectedly in the middle of a crosswalk. She was as tiny as a sparrow with a round doe face. "You're so happy," she said. "You are married. I bless you." Then she hugged us both, and I felt in her all the love which she had saved for her mother, her father, her husband, and her baby, all dead in one day. What is this place where you can resurrect yourself after you have been completely ruined? Neither woman knew how much we needed them, so we could pretend for just a moment that we were this glorious thing. The world had changed. I was given so many signs that words like decorum did not fit it anymore. The women were blind to how unrequited my love was, yet how big they conceived it to be. No one should keep such love unspoken, for it will drive you mad. Only by giving it away will you be safe again. And finally, I'm going to read a dusk poem because I'm sitting out here in the dusk and being bitten by mosquitoes. Dusk. And this is the book by Randy Ward, who's also been published in translation as well. And it's an incredible Appalachian poet who does translations from Norwegian and Danish and Faroese, which is very specific and incredible. So Randy is a friend from the Beloit Poetry Journal that we were both featured in, and did this incredible cover of a girl in galoshes standing in the middle of a whale killing. So it's a bed of blood, and this child is standing in it, and that was on the cover of Beloit. And then of course she's a plume poet, which is incredible. So this is her poem Dusk. Dusk by Randy Ward. He finished sewing his silver queen with blue spruce shadows on his boots. Thank you. Thank you all.
I guess I'm coming on now to wrap it up, and Leeya, that was amazing. That was so moving. Thank you. Stuart said, and I think that's so true, he said, this is such a profound privilege. And I think, Danny has brought so many of us together. He brought me and Leeya together. And then Plume brought Stuart and I together. And, I'll never forget that. We met at an AWP reading for Plume, and then Leeya and her family came down, and then I went to a reading for Plume in DC and met Stuart and his gorgeous wife, who is, we have to just get her on so you can see how luminous she is. So you all, thank you so much. And Zach, thank you. And Danny, thank you. And I think Danny mentioned he'd love to see more of these. And I think we may be doing some more, I think, right? We have some Plume Zooms in the works, and we'd love to do it again. For me, it was just like this wonderful space to be in, this intimacy, this kind of wombish place where it's words and it's great people, and it's beautiful. And thank you so much. Thank you all. And Zach, thank you. You're just so welcoming and the cutest thing. And I'm a really old lady, so I can say that with impunity. Don't be mad at me.
Well, thank you.
Not
And thank you all for coming. Thank you for using the phrase Plume Zoom, which I typed in an email randomly, I think, and used on something. So I was really glad that happened. I'm going to leave the Zoom running for a few minutes. So if anyone wants to unmute and chat for a minute, please stick around. I'm happy to let you chat for a minute before it shuts down completely. And also, I did record it, so I will get the recording together here sometime next week. So you may share it with anyone who wasn't able to make it today. And thanks so much for coming out again.
Thank you, Zach.
Thanks, Zach.